I've been a Frankenstein fan my whole life. Even before I ever sat down and watched the movies or read the book, I always admired this character from a very young age. As a kid, my Halloweens had the green guy all over them. And as an adult, my living room has the green guy all over it. To say that I'm a fan of the franchise is probably an understatement. And being as such, whenever it's the topic of conversation, I will inevitably hear this phrase. Frankenstein is the doctor's name, not the monster's name.
Just like it's not Frankenstein, it's Frankenstein's monster.
You're not very wrong.
Now, I've heard this a lot in jest, but I've also heard it a lot as a valid critique, or even a criticism of the way that I view the movies. Even outside of my own personal life, some of you here in the comment section have made the obligatory comment toward me, some even stating as such. It's a statement that goes overstated quite often. But here's the thing, it's not a very true statement, because it's kinda wrong. I mean, it's right, but it's also wrong. Like just about everything else in the Frankenstein movies, it's a little complicated. Let me explain. This whole name debacle has gone on for decades. And sure, this is something that could probably be attributed back to the original story, as in the book, the creature is never given a name. So sure, some of the blame could be placed on that story, but that's not a failure of the original story, it's a fixture. It's actually a plot point that is referenced at a later point, with Frankenstein's monster chastising him over never giving him one, creating him to be a person but never treating him as such, never giving him the opportunity to be one.
He never gave me a name.
So while the original story may share some of the blame, granted it being a lot more justified on that end, I think most of the fault of the confusion could probably be attributed to the Universal monster movies. Movies which made the character famous, but also muddied up its narrative. The name of both the book and the movie based on it is simply Frankenstein, the last name of the main character and the creature's creator. The last name of the main character and the creature's creator. However, when several sequels were spawned, this meant Universal had to stick to the naming convention of the first movie so that they could properly promote these movies as part of the same franchise. I mean, if you're making a Frankenstein movie, you'll want to make sure you're making Frankenstein money. So, regardless of anything else, you gotta have the Frankenstein name. With each of these Frankenstein films having the monster front and center on all of the promotional work. If you know nothing about these movies, if you know nothing about this character, that is still the name that is associated with this character. Each installment unintentionally added to that narrative. Still to this day, after all these years, it's this face that's associated with that name. Though this is far from the only character in the series to suffer from modern-day identity issues. Now, what should be stated is that the naming convention can actually be applied to our lead. To a point. Bride of Frankenstein was the first sequel. It was a movie that created the creature's significant other. So obviously the title is meant to reference the monster's partner, the character the movie was building up to the creation of, that has been dubbed the bride. But I guess in theory it could also refer to Henry's wife. But that's really just a major cop-out, because she's barely in the movie to begin with, and she doesn't have much of a part to play in the main plot. She's important in the sense that she needs to be there, but she's unimportant in the sense that she doesn't have a whole lot to do while she is there. So it's hard to act as if she's a focal point in the film without completely gaslighting yourself. The next sequel, Son of Frankenstein, saw the son of Henry Frankenstein take over his life's work, and eventually encounter his father's creation. Now, I really like the naming convention here because I think it could very easily be applied to either one of our leads. Because Son of Frankenstein could very easily be referring to the man that he's made, or the man that he assembled. In essence, they're both the Son of Frankenstein.
Your father made him. You mean to imply then that is my brother, but his mother was lightning.
Certainly not what you'd expect going into the title. There's no green-skinned, box-headed babies running around here with their arms out. So in terms of naming conventions here, it's very evident that they're invoking the name of the creator and not the creation. In a very similar manner, the next sequel, Ghost of Frankenstein, doesn't see a ghoulish zombie-like man haunt the town that burned him down in a windmill. Instead, the title refers to a 2-minute scene that kickstarts the plot. A scene which in actuality was just put in place to justify this naming convention. I'm not kidding. I wish that was a joke. Once again, the title is referring to the man as opposed to the monster, as Henry Frankenstein is the titular ghost. But here's where it all falls apart. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is a movie that takes place years and years after Dr. Frankenstein's death, as well as after the death of at least one of his 2 sons.
I saw my father become obsessed by his power. He died a horrible death, just as my grandfather did.
Dr. Frankenstein never meets the Wolfman. I mean, I guess there is a Frankenstein in this movie, but acting as if she's the titular character on a promotional poster that looks like this? Well, it's just a hard sell, to say the least. If the movie was really just about her meeting the Wolfman, then that's not nearly the event you'd expect a film like this to be. That would somehow be more underwhelming than the actual movie already is. Yet the name survives on because of the monster that's associated with it. Throw in there Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, and yeah, yet again, no doctor to speak of. He's long dead, but the monster's still front and center. Though the movie does give the only occasion of someone in these movies referring to the monster by name. Do you know what name Lou Costello calls him?
Frankie, don't let him do it to you. Frankie boy. Listen to me, Frankie.
Which is obviously short for...
It's Frankenstein!
It's pronounced Frankenstein.
Now, I know that some people are probably rolling their eyes and telling me that that's not canon and it's just a joke and it doesn't count. It was a funny movie and that was a funny thing to say. Well, if any of my argument up until this point hasn't been worth it, then add on to it that it's confirmed canonically in these films that the townfolk refer to the monster as Frankenstein, something that was a point of contention with his youngest son.
His name has become synonymous with horror and monsters. Why, 9 out of 10 people call that misshapen creature of my father's experiments
Frankenstein.
I understand that this is not the name that was chosen for him either by the person that made him or he himself, but it is the only name associated with him. And it is what people have taken to calling him in canon. Similar to how in comic media, a lot of the time, characters wind up getting called a name by press, and then all of a sudden it sticks. Yeah, the Green Goblin isn't the character's birth name, but it's still his alias and identity. I don't see why the same can't be said for the big man here. In all media, this monster doesn't have the simple luxuries of man. He doesn't even get the comfort of a name. He's never given an identity. He was created by a Frankenstein, which, in terms of creation, would make him a Frankenstein. Look, I know it's not exactly the same, they don't share any of the same blood relation, obviously, but neither do adoptive or step families, and they're still family. They could still share the same bond, and more importantly, the same last name. By all means, Henry or Victor, depending on the continuity that you're watching or reading, did make the monster. So therefore, to some extent, he should be seen as his father. The man-made man even refers to Frankenstein as father. They're family. Realistically, he should share his last name. And if he's never been given a first one, then, well, it makes sense to call the monster Frankenstein. Even going back to the original publication, it makes sense there, I just think it makes a lot more sense here, especially. In my opinion, no, Frankenstein isn't just the name of the doctor. It's the name of the doctor and the monster. The next time you hear that obligatory statement, feel free to pull up this video and tell them to think again, because some nerd on the internet said otherwise. With all that being said, if you enjoyed this deep dive in a shallow topic and want to see more Frankenstein coverage here on the channel, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Frankenstein never built a monster.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.